Mr. Ashok Sajna, Ramjad Maulana and Dr. P. Sarvanamuthu continue to stay with us on the broadcast. Dr. Sarvanamuthu, I'm coming back to you, sir. Keeping in mind that these are protests which do not have a single leader which can sit on the table and talk to the political establishment, the kind of action that happened last night, the brutal crackdown is something that many would say was a political mistake, should not have been done. But what is the way forward for restoring any kind of political stability, not just in the political quarters, in the corridors, but also on the streets of Sri Lanka?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that needs to happen is with regard to what happened last night. And I think the president needs to provide an apology to the innocent protesters that it was entirely wrong in terms of the violence that was perpetrated upon them, and there should be some sort of inquiry into it. But beyond that, I think politically he needs to set a timetable in terms of when the next elections are going to be and what is going to be done with regard to the presidency. And I think what needs to be done is abolition. Whilst he does that, then he has to continue with the IMF and arriving at a staff agreement. And also in the meantime, making sure that the fuel queues are shortened and that we do have gas and petrol and fuel to get on with our daily lives.
Dr. Sarvanamuthu, I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think that the present leadership, that the present political establishment has that kind of political foresight, keeping in mind that they took a wrong decision to crack down on the protesters, because anything less than an apology would not work? Do you think that they can put out a timetable like that? And more importantly, do the people out on the streets protesting in Sri Lanka really have that kind of patience?
Well, I hope so. I hope and pray that that is the case, or else we are then consigned to a future of political instability and economic hardship. They have to think in those terms. They have to think in terms of how they can win the trust and confidence of the people of this country. Because when the IMF agreement comes through, there are sacrifices that people have to make. And they can only make it if they have trust and confidence in a government that's asking them to make it on their behalf. So we need to, everyone needs to sit down and consider the dire nature of this situation and work according to a notion of national interest rather than particular interests. So the government has to win public trust and confidence. There is no other way.
The public trust and confidence, that's the slippery slope. Amjad Maulana, I'm coming to you. Do you think that an apology by the present political establishment, anything less than an apology, would it suffice for the protesters? How do you see the protests on the streets in the next 24 to 48 hours?
Well, like Dr. Sarvanamuthu just said as well, an apology would, it would scratch the surface, but, we were willing to compromise and we were willing to actually give the new president an actual shot to go about in setting about his plans for economic revival. And also he has pledged to go about the abolition of the executive presidency as well. So these are all aligned with what our expectations are, even though he was not the ideal candidate for the job. And we were willing to compromise on that and give him an actual shot to go about and do that. Unfortunately, at this point, with the crackdown, which was completely unnecessary and unprovoked, I think an apology would just scratch the surface, because at this point in time, the fury in the streets is running high, the tension is running high. Just when we thought that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. So I think it's best that the president and the new government and the new cabinet that have been formed, even though it's just pretty much a mirror image of what it was before, they get their act together and start delivering to the people, especially with respect to winning the trust of the people, like what Dr. Sarvanamuthu alluded to as well.
How will they win your trust? That's the million-dollar question, Amjad.
Go ahead.
I'm asking you that how will the political establishment, really win your trust? Because that's the million-dollar question, keeping in mind that there's a fierce standoff that has happened, all kinds of theories about the present political establishment being in hand in gloves with the Rajapaksas. What is it that the government will do that the protesters will really trust them?
I think they should actually set a horizon with respect to the elections, setting a date for the elections as well, because this government, this presidency, what we witnessed with the election of this president does not reflect the mandate of the people. So it's essential that in order to go about the austerity measures that they would definitely have to enact when it comes about with the IMF program and so on and so forth, to win the trust of the people to go about in doing that. They'll need to set horizons, they'll need to set a good timetable and go about in enacting that and meeting that,
Okay.
so that the people's trust in some shape or form can be won.
Mr. Sajjan